אנחנו נלמד מתוך שיעור תס עם הרבש, נקרא...
We will read from tests. We'll go into a test lesson with Rabash. We'll read from Volume 2, Part 5, Inner Light, Item 40.
דבר המתחיל, ובחינת האוביות הפחותה מזה. ולפני כן נקרא יחד תלמוד 10 הספירות.
Before we get into the lesson, we'll read from tests from Part 5, Item 40, the words of the Ari. Afterwards, the light returns to being mati in Keter, and then both Chub ascend there because of the desire they have. Then you find that there is a great distance between the sons and the light of Gal. For there are two distances between them, Bina and Chokhmah, in which there is no light. Hence, at that time, the light of Chesed rises to Bina and is called not mati in Chesed. In that state, the vessel of Chesed turns its interior and gives the 6 lights below in Gvura.
$328. You must remember, so now we're learning, and the coarseness that is less than that is the posterior in that degree. Accordingly, you can always find that the posterior of the upper degree, meaning the upper one is 3, the lower one is 2. Accordingly, you find that the posterior of the upper degree, which is 2, is the interior of the lower degree, which is only 2. Accordingly, you always find that the posterior of the upper degree is the interior of the lower degree. Hence, the upper one always wants to bestow upon the lower one and must turn its interior downward. This means that he is refined from the measure of the coarseness in him, which is interior, remains lesser in coarseness. Why? Equal to the degree of coarseness of the lower degree. In order for the lower one to be able to receive, he bestows from inside. The interior, the lower one cannot receive, so he must bestow to phase 2. Then he had to be in phase 2, in the same state that he will give him what the lower one is worthy of receiving. This is because then, if they're equivalent, it is considered close to him and can bestow to him. But if they're not in equivalence, he's distant and he can bestow to him. By this you understand that whatever the matter of bestowal of Bina to the vessel of Chesed is brought here. The vessel of Chesed is phase 1 and Bina is phase 2. Bina refined from phase 2 to phase 1. Since then, she is face to face with the vessel of Chesed from the perspective of the screen in her. So we said, on one hand, what is equivalence? What is face to face? It turns out that when Bina bestowed the light of Chesed to the vessel of Chesed, Bina was refined from phase 2 to phase 1. There was a whole order of gradual refinement here. First, Keter was refined from phase 3 to phase 2, at which time the light of Keter disappeared to the root and gave phase 2 to the vessel of Chokhmah. Then the vessel of Bina united with it into one, and then that means the vessel of Bina rises to Chokhmah. Afterwards, phase 2 is also refined to phase 1. At that time, the lights of the vessels of Chokhmah and Bina disappear to Keter and phase 1. of the vessel of Binah is bestowed upon the vessel of Chesed in illumination of Chokhmah. So the vessel of refinement, but how's the order? He doesn't say that. So I'll start again. We see now that expanding in Keter with the expanding in Chokhmah, not with the expanding in Binah or expanding in Chesed. So that when we say that the light expanded in Chesed, so the vessel of Binah and Chokhmah, the light departed from Binah to Keter. Again. Then phase 2 was also refined to phase 1. That phase 2 refined to phase 1. What was that? We should say that she gave to Binah phase 2, which is Binah, to phase 1 to who? To Zeranpin. Again. Then the vessel of Binah united with it into one. So what is there until the vessel of Binah? Phase 2. And the vessel of Chokhmah also 2. And then phase 2 is also refined, that it has from the vessel of Chokhmah to phase 1 at that time. So she gave to phase 1 to who? To the vessel of Binah. That's what we're lacking here. At that time, the lights of the vessels of Chokhmah and Binah disappeared to Keter, and phase 1 is bestowed upon the vessel of Chesed in illumination of Chokhmah. So there's a difference between phase 1 and phase 2. Let's start phase 1. In the beginning, the light came to the vessel of Keter, expanding in Keter. Then it stopped expanding in Keter. The surrounding light canceled the screen and became from 3 to 2. No, from 4 to 3, then from 3 to 2. That's called face with Chokhmah, and gave to the vessel of Chokhmah 3, 2. That is considered face-to-face on the screen. We also learn that while it was expanding in Keter, it would illuminate the light of Chasadim. That's the face of Keter. Now, when phase 4 refined, and only has phase 3 of clothing and phase 2 of coarseness, then Keter already flips his face downward and the posterior upward, meaning first his face was Chasadim. Now the face became posterior. He's not using the face. He's using the posterior. What are the posterior? Chokhmah. Now he bestows from Chokhmah to Chokhmah. We find that Keter of Chokhmah face to face from 2 sides. Also from the vessels, which is the vessel of Chokhmah, and also the coarseness. Also, Keter 3, 2, now refined in Chokhmah of 3, 2. Clear? So, now it expanded in Chokhmah. Then we learn that Chokhmah flipped its face and only gave illumination, meaning that 3, meaning that it had 2, that the vessel of Chokhmah had 3 of clothing, was refined to 2 of clothing. Two of clothing, we learned there was a coupling on two bits, and it only gave phase two and illuminated to the vessel of Binah. Then we learn that she received vak called chasadim, but chokhmah still had chokhmah. So we explained why Binah is called chasadim, because she is delighted in mercy. But chokhmah, his anterior is only chokhmah. Afterwards, phase two refined the coarseness that was in the vessel of chokhmah and gave to phase one called Binah of birth to the vessel of Binah. We find that now in the vessel of chokhmah, that before was phase 3 on 2, has no more than phase 2 on 1. And 2-1 she gave to Binah. Now we see that it didn't expand in Chokhmah and Binah as delighted in mercy. So we say that phase 1 in the vessel of Binah couldn't give to the vessel of Chesed because it's like a baby that needs the mother. While Zeranpin comes out, it needs Chokhmah, and there is no Chokhmah. So in that state, it doesn't expand in Keter. No, sorry, expanding, not expanding in Chokhmah, but expanding in Binah. Now when it expands in Binah, so the vessel of Chokhmah refined from phase 3 and from phase 2. So 3-2 of the vessel of Chokhmah ascends to Keter. When 3-2 ascends to Keter, it expands in Keter again. Once it expands in Keter, so there's Keter in mercy. Now we find that expanding in Keter and not in Chokhmah or in Binah, and the sons are in Binah. That's one stage. Stage 2, afterwards, it didn't expand in Keter. So it expanded in Chokhmah. So now in Chokhmah, there's phase 3-2 with the light of Chokhmah. So he learns that Binah ascended to Chokhmah, meaning that Binah cancels her phase that refined for the need of the sons. So the sons would have phase 1 that had Chokhmah. So she annuls herself 2 ways. 1, she takes Chokhmah for the sake of the sons. We find that the sons are already big. 2, she cannot give to Zeranpin phase 1 since she was phase 2. That's why she also refines from phase 2 to phase 1. So we find that she didn't expand in Keter, but expanded in Chokhmah. Now Binah is in Chokhmah because she annulled herself. Her phase 2 ascended to Chokhmah and expanded in Chesed, meaning that from Binah changing her phase from 2 to 1 gives to the vessel of Chesed Chokhmah. So now I'm reading that it didn't expand in Keter, but expanded in Chokhmah and expanded in Binah. By that she ascended to Chokhmah and expanded in Chesed. Now, when I say now, it expanded in Binah, when Binah refined. So he says afterwards that it didn't expand in Chokhmah, also Chokhmah refined. When Chokhmah refined, we say 3-2, that in Chokhmah and Binah also incorporated there. In Chokhmah it also illuminates now only phase 1. That's why they ascended 3-2 of Chokhmah, and Binah also incorporated there. They ascended to Keter and expanded in Keter, not expanded in Chokhmah and Binah. Now we see that in Keter there's mercy and no Chokhmah. We see that Chesed needs Chokhmah, but it doesn't have. So in a sense of the vessel of Binah, that the interior illuminates as Binah, as the lighted in mercy. And by that, the Chesed that now doesn't have Chokhmah gives its rest to Gvura. We find that we need to say now, expanded in Keter, and didn't expand in Chokhmah and in Binah and in Chesed. Expanding in Gvura, that's how it should be, that's how it is.
כאן נשאלת השאלה, תמיד לומדים.
Here the question is asked. We always learn that first phase 4 is refined, then phase 3, then phase 2. It's impossible to say that in the level there will be phase 1 and phase 2 isn't refined. From where comes phase 1? So you're compelled to say first it was refined to phase 2. Here there are changes, unlike as it was in Parzuf Galigalta, where there's the matter of expanding and not expanding, stages, stage 1, stage 2. In stage 1 I learn simply. Expanding in Keter that had phase 3. Phase 3 was refined, became phase 2. And phase 2 was refined, became phase 1. Thus we must learn, but we don't learn thus. But what do we learn? After it was not expanding in Keter and became expanding in Chokhmah, then phase 3 of Chokhmah was refined to phase 2, gives to Bina phase 2, and afterwards Chokhmah was refined from phase 2 to phase 1, gives to Bina phase 1, and finished. With this is remained. Bina couldn't give phase 1 further. Why? Without Chokhmah it doesn't work. So there's a change here. What's the change? I cannot say from Bina that was refined from phase 2 to give phase 1 to Chesed. They're a baby that needs his mother. So she remains in her own phase, which is desire for Chesed. And since the sons also benefit from the desire for Chesed. Chokhmah there isn't. Why is there no Chokhmah? That Chokhmah was refined. It's not written like that. We're learning two things that get confused. We're learning that there's to phase 2 and there's to Bina phase 2, what it received from Chokhmah from the time when it was expanding in Chokhmah. When it received phase 2, we say the phase 2 it has is chasadim. Why don't we say that the phase 2 it has is chokhmah? This is the first question. Who tells you thus? We learn at the time when it gave phase 1 to the vessel of chokhmah, binah, then chokhmah was refined with phase 3 and with phase 2. There is no longer chokhmah in the vessel of chokhmah. Therefore, there's only chasadim in binah. We understand very well. But when he learns something incidental, all at the time when it gave chokhmah on the level of phase 2, it was from chasadim, not from chokhmah. It was only chasadim. Why does he need to say it only had chasadim? Who compels him, and for what benefit? He comes and says something incidental. Since we see in the world of Atzilut that when Yeshut gives birth to Zeranpin in Chasadim without Chokhmah, Katnut, there was no Chokhmah in Bina. So he gives us also here an example of Yesod. So what is received in the vessel of Chokhmah, the level of the male called Vak of phase 2, where the male is only Vak. There is only Chasadim there. Why? But then expanding in Chokhmah. Again, afterwards, when it gives phase 1 to Bina, that Chokhmah must be refined from phase 2, phase 1, then not expanding in Chokhmah, then there's Chasadim in Bina. I understand very well. Why is there no Chokhmah? Because from the vessel of Chokhmah it was already refined, both from its phase 3 and from its phase 2. But now, when I say it gives him Vak of Chokhmah, Vak of the level which is phase 2 and is considered Vak, why is there no Chokhmah? Why is there no Chokhmah? We learned because Bina is called desire for Chesed. This we learned yesterday, because Bina is desire for Chesed. What afterwards? Why afterwards do we say in stage 2, not in stage 1? What was afterwards? That the vessel of Chokhmah was refined from phase 2. That the vessel of Chokhmah was refined from phase 2 to phase 1 and gives phase 1 in the vessel of Bina. Then she doesn't give Chokhmah, then it has no Chasadim. This is not because of desire for Chesed, but because there's no Chokhmah in the level. This is what I want to emphasize, you understand? Thus it has phase 1, which has sons, wants to give. Even though it wants to give Chokhmah, who will receive? Now, only in stage 2, when I say afterwards, not expanding in Keter, and then expanding in Chokhmah, now expanding in Chokhmah, there's a novelty here. I'm not saying it now in Bina, desire for Chesed. Why? It has a phase for the sons. For her sons that are phase 1, that need Chokhmah, then she nullifies her own phase as desire for Chesed and adheres with Chokhmah. Then phase 1 in her already has Chokhmah. And I learned then, expanding in Chokhmah, and Bina ascends to Chokhmah and receives Chokhmah. And the sons she has, which are phase 1, she now has Chokhmah. But to give to Zeranpin, she cannot. Why? Chesed is phase 1 and she's phase 2. So she's now compelled to be refined from her phase 2 to phase 1. Thus, two things. She receives Chokhmah in the vessel of Chokhmah. Why does she change her way? She already now has phase 1. Therefore, since she has Chokhmah and wants to give birth, then phase 2 becomes phase 1. So it comes out now when I begin to say not expanding in Chokhmah, when, not at the time when phase 2 of Chokhmah was refined to phase 1, from phase 2 of Chokhmah to phase 1 of Chokhmah. Say phase 2 of Chokhmah ascended upward, but I'm beginning to learn two things at once. That the phases in Chokhmah, that Bina ascends to her, and Bina nullifies her phase 2. So I learn the phase 2 of Bina and phase 2 of Chokhmah with phase 3 of Chokhmah ascend to Keter, and it becomes expanding in Keter. When it becomes expanding in Keter, how is it expanding in Keter? That it became not expanding in Chokhmah. So the question is asked, what happened first? Did the light of Chokhmah depart first and afterwards it became expanding in Keter? Or do I say no, first it became expanding in Keter, then the control of Chasadim in the level, then Chokhmah can illuminate.
נעבור לחלק הבא של השיעור לימוד